Hey guys, it's Atandon DMD, and welcome back to a new YouTube video. Today, we'll be talking about the Earth, Sun, and Moon relationship. So this is actually a project made by my group, but I decided to blur the name for privacy reasons. Alright, on to the next slide. And here's the table of contents, basically what we will be talking about. Vocabulary. Section 1. Vocabulary. The axis is an imaginary line where the Earth rotates. The rotation is a circular movement of an object around a central line. A revolution is an action by a celestial body of going round in an orbit or an elliptical course. An orbit is a regular repeating path that one object in space takes around another one. A solstice is a time when the sun reaches its most northerly or southerly excursion relative to the celestial equator on a celestial sphere. Vocabulary continued. Inertia is a property of matter by which it stays the same unless acted on by another force. A lunar eclipse is when Earth's shadow falls on the moon and makes a lunar eclipse. A solar eclipse is when the moon passes between the Earth and the sun. A moon phase is the different shapes of the moon we see from Earth at different times of the month. Tides are along the coast of every ocean on Earth, and the water level changes on a regular basis. And an aurora is an interaction of the solar wind and the Earth's magnetic field, basically like the northern lights. Now, solar and lunar eclipses. Section 2. A solar eclipse. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon passes between the sun and the Earth. A solar eclipse can either be partial, annular, or total. A partial solar eclipse occurs when the moon doesn't fully cover the sun. An annular solar eclipse occurs when the new moon moves in front of the sun but does not cover it completely. A total solar eclipse occurs when the moon completely covers the sun. Lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse occurs when the Earth moves in between the sun and the moon. They are similar to a solar eclipse and can either be partial, annular, or total as well. Those three are basically the same as the other solar versions. As in the background, the moon appears red while the sun in a solar eclipse appears black with a ring of fire on its perimeter. On to the next section, Earth's rotation and revolution, Section 3. Rotation. What is rotation, you may ask? Well, a rotation is a circular movement of an object around a central line. The central line that Earth rotates on is called the axis. Rotation causes day and night. You may have noticed that most different places on Earth have different time zones. For example, people in Florida have a different time zone than someone in London. And it takes 24 hours for Earth to rotate on its axis. Revolution. What is revolution, you may also ask? Well, a revolution is an action by a celestial body of going round in an orbit or an elliptical course. In this case, the Earth revolves around the sun. This is also part of the reason of what causes the seasons, which you'll learn about more in the next few slides. It takes Earth 1 year to revolve around the sun. On to the next one. What causes the seasons? Section 4. The 4 seasons. There are a total of 4 seasons. They include spring, summer, winter, and fall. Each location may be affected by the seasons differently depending on how close it is to the equator. The equator is an imaginary line that divides the middle of the Earth into the north and southern hemisphere. The closer a location is to the equator, The hotter it gets, but the farther a location is from the equator, the colder it is. For instance, in Florida, we mostly deal with rainy summers and somewhat cold winters. On the other hand, people in Alaska go through summers up to only 70 degrees and winters as low as negative 50 degrees. What causes the four seasons? There are two main factors of why we have the seasons on Earth. They include the Earth's tilt and Earth's orbit around the Sun. For example, if the northern hemisphere is facing the Sun, then it is summer, but if it's not, it is winter. And here's a diagram. Now, on to how does the Earth stay in place? Section 5. Gravity and how it works. Gravity is a force which pulls anything with mass towards an object, a force of attraction, and larger objects tend to attract smaller objects towards them. For example, the center of the Earth pulls us down, which keeps us from floating. How Earth and other planets stay in place. The Sun attracts the planets, including Earth, which pulls them toward the Sun. Due to this, the planets stay in orbit. But to be clear, Earth doesn't actually stay in place, but it revolves around the Sun at 67,000 miles per hour. What causes the phases of the Moon? Section 6. As you may already know, the Moon revolves around the Earth. Depending on what position the Moon is in with the Earth and the Sun, it can cause the 8 common phases of the Moon. They include the new moon, where you cannot see the moon, the waxing crescent, the first quarter, which is the first half of the moon, the waxing gibbous, the full moon, the waning gibbous, the third quarter, which is basically the second half of the moon, and the waning crescent. And here are all the moon phases. What causes tides? Section 7. What are tides? Tides are the regular rise and fall of water levels of the ocean. The force exerted by the moon on the ocean, causing a change in tide, is called a tidal force. Some types of tides can include a semi-diurnal tide, a flood tide, an ebb tide, a spring tide, and neap tides. A semi-diurnal tide is a tide that reaches a high and low tide twice a day and are approximately 6 hours apart. A flood tide is a change from a low tide to a high tide. An ebb tide is the change from a high tide to a low tide. So it's basically the opposite from a flood tide. A spring tide occurs when the Earth, Sun, and Moon are all aligned. And a neap tide is caused when the Sun and Moon are exactly at 90 degrees or 270 degrees. What causes tides? Tides are caused by the gravitational force which are exerted on the Earth by the Moon. The Sun also has a slight impact on tides, but to a smaller extent. Even though the Moon has 1/100th the mass of Earth and therefore has less gravitational force, the Moon is still close enough to Earth to exert a force on the oceans and land. Due to the easy flow of water, the Moon exerts a force on the water and is easily noticeable. Because the land requires more gravity to exert a force on, there is much less of a change on land. As the Moon hovers over a certain position on the oceans, the gravity exerted on that water causes a bulge, which is called a high tide. What are the effects of space exploration on Florida? Section 8. What is the Kennedy Space Center? The Kennedy Space Center is one of the most famous places in Florida. It was established on March 7, 1962, in Merritt Island. The name was originally called the Launch Operations Center, or LOC. It was changed to the John F. Kennedy Space Center by Lyndon B. Johnson to honor his legacy after the assassination of Kennedy. This modification was made in November of 1963. Consequently, the Air Force altered the name of the Cape Canaveral Missile Test Annex to become the Cape Kennedy Air Force Station. The first rocket launch was the Saturn V rocket launch for the Apollo 4 mission on November 9, 1967. The Apollo 11 mission, or the moon landing, in 1969 was launched in the Kennedy Space Center. Effects of space exploration on Florida. A report from the Kennedy Space Center highlighted some of the effects of space exploration for 2024. Here is what some of the effects are. Over 15,000 jobs were provided to people such as civil servants, contractors, tenants, and construction crews. From the 2023 fiscal year report, about 1,200 more people came to work for the Kennedy Space Center in 2024. The employees who were also a part of the Kennedy Space Center in 2024 also had great diversity and equality in the workplace. According to the report, 99% of people believe that the crews and teams were devoted to assisting their center reach its goals, and the KSC also has direct steps to meet the accessibility needs of people 90% of the time. Effects of space exploration on Florida continued. In total, the Kennedy Space Center earned $2.717 billion in 2024. They earned most of the revenue from exploration of ground systems and commercial crew programs. Compared to 2023, the Kennedy Space Center has earned approximately $100 million more in 2024. In terms of the amount of people who have been drawn into the events in the Kennedy Space Center, a large amount of people tuned in. In 2024, over 12,000 people saw 12 missions that launched from the Space Coast. Over 240,000 people from around the globe was virtually involved in NASA missions by the 12 Virtual Guest program, and approximately 69,000 of those people were newly introduced to it. In April of 2024, the Japanese Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, and Science visited the Kennedy Space Center, which helped America and Japan's alliance as it turned into a worldwide partnership that is dedicated to the promotion of shared growth. In education, the Kennedy Space Center hosted over 100 STEM interns in the center, hybrid and virtually. The NASA Days events gained over 475 students at minority-serving institutions and other events. By the virtual classroom connections that is hosted around America, more than 21,000 people took part in STEM programs. And now, the last section. How does different concerns affect science? Section 9. What concerns affect science? Some of the concerns that can affect science badly is the lack of money or funding. Many experiments or explorations can be very expensive. Lots of the experiments and explorations need funding to even be happening. Another concern is the lack of replication of the studies. Sometimes, scientists don't have the materials or funding to replicate the studies that have been made. It can be very difficult to prove if a study is true or not. What concerns affect science? Continued. Other concerns include science being poorly communicated. Whenever science results are released to the world, it can be really important to say it as clearly as possible, because if the results are poorly communicated, people can misunderstand what result is trying to get across to the public. The end. Thank you for your time, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this presentation that me and my group have done. It's a lot of slides, but I think, and the whole group believes, that we've done a really good job. Thank you.